Hi everyone. I just wanted to sit down. The first thing I was going to do was do reviews of my decks and see where I went from there. But I thought actually that given the fact that one of my big aims with this channel is looking at tarot and other divination and just stuff in general through a disabled lens, I thought that I would make this video talking about accessibility, why it's important, and maybe even using some examples of times where I think it was done well or could have been done better. Now, if I do use examples from decks I have, or even decks that exist out there, this is nothing against those decks or the creators, because first of all, any deck that I've taken into my house is a deck that I at least like to some degree, and second of all, they are real people. Even mass market decks are created by real people, unless it's AI, and I'm against AI, so they're all created by real people, and I want to be respectful of that. I just think that I want to be able to share when I think maybe something could be improved, and hope that people can learn from it and maybe take that into account. Now, again, it's all subjective, and another thing is that I am one person. I am a person who lives with a visual impairment. I am legally blind, and my partner lives with diabetes and MS. However, that doesn't obviously mean that I know every experience. You could go up to 10 people who are visually impaired and they could say, well, this is completely different than my experience. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, is that it's always good to get different perspectives and different people's experiences. And it's also important to think about different types of accessibility as well, because just because something's accessible to one group doesn't mean it's accessible to another group. Accessibility is one of those things that I am extremely passionate about. I used to work on a play that they were trying to make accessible, and I was able to help out to make it extremely accessible for a visually impaired audience. And right now I do work with technology and making websites more accessible. So accessibility is one of those things that I've become very, very passionate about, and I think that a lot of people just look at it as like, just do this thing, or just, I don't know, wear glasses or something like that. And like, even with my glasses on, I struggle to read like normal sized fonts. So, and then there's the depth perception, there's other struggles that go with my disability. So I kind of consider myself very lucky in terms of my disability, because I was born with it. So everything I know is sort of my world, I guess. And I know developing a disability later can be very difficult. But because of my disability, as I said, it's very hard for me to read print. It's very hard. I use a screen reader and screen magnifier when I go on the computer, and that kind of detail. So I think maybe it would be helpful to use some examples of things that maybe don't work as well for me, or kind of could be improved. But I guess before I do that, some things that I think that people should keep in mind, at least in terms of my disability. Now, granted, some of these things might be like an aesthetic thing. So if I say like, okay, I personally can't really use black and white decks as easily. There is a black and white deck in my collection, but I typically have a little bit more trouble differentiating stuff if it's black and white, or if something is a little too dark, or if it's very busy. Like a lot of collage decks I find are very busy. There's a lot of small details, and that makes my life very difficult. But I would never ask an artist to sacrifice their art for something that might make things a little easier. Cardstock sometimes can be very hard to shuffle, and I feel like if I'm struggling with shuffling cardstock, I feel like my partner probably is going to struggle even more, because MS causes you to not have a lot of dexterity. And then there's guidebooks, where if a guidebook's text is too small, or if there's weird contrast, and this can be on cards too, or back on cards, like if the border is too opaque and so it's blends in, it can be very difficult. So these are just some things off the top of my head. I'm going to use some examples. Most of these are probably going to be examples of when something has missed for me. But again, don't take this as any shade towards the creators, because they are lovely decks, and some of them I love very much, and I will keep loving them. But just in case people want to look at it and think about how to make any deck that's coming into their collection, or any deck they're creating, more accessible. So let's see. First of all, this deck is very reflective, which can be a bit difficult sometimes because of the way my eyes work, and sometimes when light reflects into one eye, it doesn't reflect into the other. That can be very confusing. My main issue with this deck is these borders, mostly because the way that the Roman numeral is formatted, some of the Roman numeral is not visible, and that can make it a little tricky to read, like tell the difference between the I's and the V's when I'm looking at it. And this is a very pretty deck, by the way. So I do find the color contrast for the borders is very good. I can read it all. It's just I wish that the font, see, the font's okay for there, but for the white on black, for some reason, it just makes, it's just very difficult. And I think it's a shame, because I want to like it more. So yeah, give me that. I sometimes like to call this my National Geographic deck, and my biggest problem with this deck is the colored titles. Now, these colored titles and the keyword and these borders work sometimes, but sometimes I'm trying to think of the one that's really difficult for me. One second. These are all alphabetical because I like alphabetizing. Of this one. This is very difficult for me sometimes. I don't know what it is, but the combination of this yellow and blue makes my eyes hurt. And it can make it, I can tell that it says Dove, but it's just, I wish it wasn't this color. I think that's the only card in here that I feel like is just really difficult, but it is kind of one of those things of, I wish that maybe they had looked at that and picked like a slightly different blue, or something that wouldn't feel so contrasted in a way that it's hard to explain, because I don't necessarily know how to articulate it. I don't know what other people see, and I don't know what I see comparatively. But that's that. So this deck is more of like a shuffle issue for me, where it's like sometimes they just clump and stick together, and I don't want to get all of them all shuffled. But and also size. Size can be a big issue. Now, I don't know how big my hands are compared to other people, but this is a pretty decently big deck. I have a really big deck. Size can also be a factor, because some people have smaller hands, or some people aren't as dexterous. So just getting your hand around big cards can be very tough. So I would think about that. But yeah, this is just like, sometimes this one's not as bad. I think I've kind of broken it in, but like sometimes more grippy cards can just be a little bit of a problem. This one's nice and rainbow. Okay. Oh, and just another aside, one thing that would also be nice is, I mean, this would be like a major sort of like, not pipe dream, I guess, but just kind of like, I'm never going to ask anyone to do this, but there's a part of me that internally wishes that every guidebook could have an audio version of the guidebook, just because I learn better through audio. But again, I know that's a tall order, though. Speaking of guidebooks and adding stuff in, I always appreciate a guidebook that will lightly will describe what's in the picture, because it gives me an idea of what information I'm looking for and what I'm trying to pull out of the card, or at least what the author is trying to express with the card. So yeah, this guidebook, it's just, the text is very small, and a little bit tricky to read because of that. Like even my partner says this text is kind of small. So, you know, there's that. You know, I'm not saying her vision is perfect 20/20 vision, but if she's saying the text is kind of small, then I'm, you know, going to believe that, because I think it's small, but I think all text is small. Okay, so apparently I didn't press start again. This deck I find can be a bit busy in terms of like, I think it's collage, but I could be wrong. I'm not very well versed in that, but like sometimes I feel like the artwork can be a bit like, what am I looking at? What is going on in this? And I'm not exactly finding the picture that exemplifies that right now. I don't know, maybe my eyes are just having a good day. I don't know. But like, very busy, small details can just overwhelm my vision. This card is a little bit sometimes. Like, okay, okay. You know, like are these, okay, these are flowers, I think. And then there's the arms and the cat. And it's like, it kind of is like, it takes me a moment to sort of absorb, and that's fine. But it would potentially be nice, as I said, to sort of tie in, to have a bit of description in the guidebook, to just say, these are the details maybe to look for or to pull out, because I'm not telling people how to think or feel about a deck, but just kind of a way to sort of like draw your attention to parts of the deck, or to, you know, give you something to focus on. Now this deck, now as I said, I love this deck. But sometimes the artwork can be a bit dark, and that kind of makes it a little tricky for me to know what's happening or to really read. And of course with this, the minor arcana are not, they're labeled with a number, but that's it. And sometimes that can be hard to find. I'm trying to find a good example of one, but you'd think I would have prepared this. But like, I've had trouble occasionally finding some of the Roman numerals within the artwork. Yeah, there's the 2. See, that was very hard for me to see. Like some of these I just picked out right away. This 2 was very difficult for me to pull out. Obviously I can count the pentacles, so I could figure it out, but if I'm just looking at it compared to, say, like this card, like I can see that 3 pretty much right away. So just small details like that can be a little bit tricky, like, or nice. Like these borders are very easy to read. Now the font is a little bit, what's the word, like, it's not like a simple font, it's a pretty font, but it's not illegible for me. I can easily read what it says, so that's nice. Now I know that there's a second version of this deck that does change this font, but I find this font very difficult to read. It could also be because I'd never learned cursive. I was taking up cursive to learn Braille, and maybe I'll show you something cool later in the end of the video. Actually, I'm going to show you that, so stay tuned for that, I guess. But it can be very difficult for me to read. Now, as I said, I know that this deck is coming out in the UU version, and I do want it that has a more legible and easy to read font, because yeah, and then the Roman numerals for the for the majors are at the bottom, so that it's easier to find and see. So, but that's just a good example of how a font can maybe be a little bit harder to read under certain circumstances. I'm trying to think of how a good example of the border being too opaque for me to be able to read, or not the border, but the little thing for the text. But this one, I find that this is a little reflective, so sometimes the card itself is reflective, but even the like border or the sort of where the title is, and so sometimes it can be a bit hard to read because like in certain lighting it's harder. I feel like all I'm saying is it's harder to do. It's harder to do, and like I'm sorry for that. I think most of that is just because I struggle at explaining and being super clear. But my point is that I just find this a little difficult when I use this deck, so. This is another example of certain things just being too small. Like, there's a number here. This is very hard to see. And I get it. They don't want to bother the images with the number, but it does mean that if I'm trying to put them back in order, I kind of have to try a little harder. And also, I do find this font to be a little hard to identify, but that's okay. Though I do think that the artwork itself is minimalist, so it kind of makes my life a little bit easier to identify what is being depicted, even though it's just an animal, so yeah. Okay, so this deck doesn't really have opaqueness, it just has the text on the thing. And that's fine, but I find that this, I can tell it says knowledge, but because of the white, it kind of blends in. So, and this is hard to read right now. I can't tell what that says off the top of my head. Courage, okay. If I zoom in, I can, but like I hold it closer, I can, but you know, some of these I can read a lot easier, but because it's kind of busy or the contrast, and also I do find these to be a little small, but yeah, because this one I can read it easily, like, you know, but then some of these I would have to struggle a little bit more. This one definitely, though I love this card. So again, like, I love this card. I just wish that maybe this was like a banner or something like that, so that it was a little bit more, you know, easy for me to identify. Now, it's in the book as well, so I can pull that out. But, you know, sometimes we don't want to pull the book out. Okay, I think this is the last deck I'm going to show off, because I'm not going to pull out all my decks. But I think that another thing that can be tricky sometimes is symbols. Now, this is a deck that is in multiple different languages, so I understand why they didn't write they didn't want to make write all the titles, all the different languages with the different card titles. I explained that badly, but the problem that I have with it is mostly in the court cards, because the court cards have like a little symbol right there. Now, it's very hard for me to understand what that symbol is, so I just sort of have to figure out what the court card is based on how it looks, which I can do. It's not the end of the world, but it would just maybe be nice if instead of like a little symbol, it had been like, you know, a P for page and an N for knight and a Q for queen and a K for king or something along those lines, just to make it more identifiable. Actually, another thing that can be important is color contrast. So, my biggest complaint with this deck would be that the red for fire and the pink for air and swords is a little similar. Now, right now my eyes are telling the difference, especially because I'm looking at them side by side. But if I just looked at one or the other, I might get them confused, and especially for somebody maybe who has less color vision than I do, or something along those lines, it could be a little bit trickier to sort of identify from there, if that makes sense. So, yeah. One thing I wish I could ask for as well would potentially be just something like Braille. Like, I know that there are Braille trading cards and, not trading cards, playing cards. I did that last time video too, but anyway, playing cards and some other games. I don't have any. Kind of wish I did, but you know, whatever. Maybe I'll have to see if CNIB if I can buy anything from the CNIB, whatever. But, you know, just, if I had the wherewithal to make a Braille deck, I would. And here's something really cool. I don't know if it's going to fit on the screen. This is my Braille Atlas, which does have large print as well, because this print is really big and I can easily see it, but you're not going to see this on screen. Can you see how that's, like, raised up? This would be a very difficult thing, I think, to do with cards, because you'd almost have to have thick cards, potentially, but you could potentially Braille onto them. But this is just some example of how a tactile experience would be done really well. These are mountains. Woo. Sorry, I'm just playing around with it now. I love playing with my Braille Atlas. I don't know when I got it or where I got it from. I also have a large print dictionary and a large print thesaurus that I use regularly. Also, my hand looks very dark because this is very white. I also use other tools, and I'm not going to go into them all because I don't need to, but I just thought that might be a good example of just how, I don't know, if anyone's creative enough. I mean, I'm creative enough to do it. I just have I'm not able to 3D print or anything along those lines, so there's no any way that I could even conceive of, like, I could use a Braille labeler if I had one and Braille label my cards. But, and I think there is a company that does do Brailing on certain decks. I don't have one, but I don't know. Just something fun to show at the end. So if you ever say, like, what is the point of this? Why make a big deal about accessibility or all that? I think it's just because spirituality or divination or anything should be accessible. And it should be available to as many people as possible. And that's not an easy task. It's not easy to do because, especially given my disability, tarot and oracle and Normand, all that stuff is a visual medium. And so it's very hard to make a visual medium accessible in that way. However, I think that there are always ways to do it. And I think that we should try to make things as accessible and open, because then we foster a community of love and acceptance. And this stuff is a passion for me also. So as playing video games, there are a few things that I have a passion for, and sometimes I feel ostracized because I can't enjoy something in the way somebody else can, because the thing is not made to be accessible to me. And so I have to sit here struggling. To go slightly off topic, something I really enjoy is anime. And a lot of times, there are some people, it's gotten better, but there are some people who will swear up and down that you should watch anime with English subtitles. Now, not going into a topic of how, technically speaking, watching English subtitles is still watching a translated version, but also, I can't watch subtitles. I can, if I want to pause every 5 seconds and be confused with who's talking and all that. But if I don't want to do that, if I just want to sit down and enjoy a show, I have to watch it. So people who are like, well, dub is the worst thing ever and how dare you do it, kind of makes me feel like I don't belong in that community. And so, and I even had a conversation with somebody about that where they just basically went, well, I'm dyslexic and I learned how to read subtitles. And I was like, good for you. I have a friend, I used to have a friend, I haven't spoken to him in ages, who can see nothing in one eye and light and shadow in the other eye. No trying harder is going to make him be able to read subtitles. So we need to understand that in order for us to have an inclusive world and an inclusive space, we should open it to everyone, no matter what their struggles are. And the same thing goes for in cards. I'm very glad that we're getting a lot more like racial and queer representation, especially because I am very queer. Like, I don't know. I can go into that, but whatever, it doesn't matter. But also disability and showing disability in normal life. Like, I think there was something, I don't know where I saw it, or if I said something or something where it's like, well, why don't you, like, what if, I think it was on a group, but anyway, like, what if the one suit were, like, canes, but, like, mobility canes, basically, and I was like, that is one of the most clever ideas ever, like, could you just imagine? But, like, just people with mobility issues, people with sensory issues, people with just all sorts of disabilities are a part of us. And they are a part of our community. And we should love them and accept them for who they are and what they need. Accessibility and inclusion are not a burden. They are something that is very valuable, and it can go a long way to making somebody feel like they belong and feel like they don't have to try twice as hard just to get something that everyone else can do right away. Because that is another problem that I've had with disability in the past, to just general situations. I have to try extra hard. I remember when I was in university, I would be able to record my lectures. It was something that I could do, but the thing is, like, my mom was like, well, anyone would love to be able to listen to the lectures. I'm like, thinking, yes, but first of all, I don't know how to spell some of this stuff. And second of all, I have to listen to the lecture 2 times just to get notes. So if the lecture is 3 hours, now I'm spending 6 hours just listening to somebody talk about this thing and not actually doing the other work. So, you know, so that's just something that was on my mind and I wanted to share. So thank you. And if this inspires you to be more inclusive, or if it just makes you think a little bit better, or not better, think a little bit harder, or on your decks, or decks that you have, or decks that you're going to make, I think that is a wonderful thing. And I hope this didn't come off too preachy either. I hope that this came off as much as it could, you know. So thank you, and have a nice day.